So we will have 5 different brief inputs from the different countries. Then we will have a brief conversation among each other to dig a little bit deeper into certain questions. And then there will be a Q&A session with all of you. Now we are ready to start with our topic, and I like to hand over to Carolyn Medel-Añonuevo from the UNESCO Regional Office in Southern Africa, and she is located in Harare. So the floor is yours.
So I'm very pleased to be able to share UNESCO's work, but I saw it was supposed to be Africa, but I am just going to share our experience in South Africa. And maybe just to, I'm trying now to say that in fact, in 2015, just before the approval of the SDG, UNESCO held an African regional meeting in Rwanda. And in the theme on education for sustainable development and global citizenship, a very important key issue, aside from commitment to ESD by national governments, holistic and integrated approach, having to focus on testing and competition. A key area that was discussed was teacher preparation and availability of teaching and learning materials on ESD GECD. So this is where I will focus, as this has been the work that we have been done. As you all know, the world is suffering a climate crisis, and Africa is really bearing the brunt of this crisis. We have fuel outage, electricity, power cuts, drought. And so in fact, the challenge that we face is how do we face all these problems, society, environment, and economy, which involves history, culture, science, knowledge, gender. And so a qualitatively new kind of education and learning, especially transformative learning, is key. And so how do we do that? I am reading the slide. I'm conscious that there are interpretations, so I'm just reading the slide. And so in fact, the challenge here in Africa is how to combine the Agenda 2030 with the African Agenda of 2063 and ESD. We know that these are so complex mix of factors, the connection between climate, disease, food security, livelihood security, and the integration of a global agenda to a regional agenda to a national agenda is quite complex. So in our office, we try to make sure that the countries are able to attend to this and not just say, okay, that's ESD, but what does Africa talk about when it comes to ESD? Sorry, there's a continental education strategy for Africa. And we know that with what we call CESA 1625, which ends in 4 years, we would like to not only own the global sustainable development goals, but adapt and make them compatible with African aspirations. As many of you know, Africa is the most youthful continent. So the question is, how is teacher education preparing teachers to support children to live in a more complex world under rapidly changing conditions? So in fact, our present work, which is called Sustainability Starts with Teachers, is building on almost 3 decades of work in Southern Africa. We're very pleased to be able to work on to build on the work that has been done by many actors, including the Rhodes University, which is our main partner. There has been a lot of work together with the SADC, which is the Southern Africa Development Community, which is the regional economic community in the region. And from 2022 to 2014, we have tried to make sure that we are working and consolidating our work with the Swedish international training programs, with SADC, the Regional Environmental Education Program. As you see, the term itself has changed from environmental education to ESD. And starting 2017, in our office, we have been working consistently and again, building on the work that has been done, starting with the Japan Funds in Trust. And now we have been very privileged to be endowed by the Swedish government to work on a 4-year project. And let me just briefly say that in fact, all these 3 decades, you have alumni and people who have undertaken this experience, but they're not well connected. So they're undermobilized, there's a tendency to be fragmented. So the challenge is how to mobilize this rich expertise to connect them and to align and expand around Agenda 2030, SDG context, climate change, and the Africa vision of 2063. So that's our work on sustainability starts with teachers, which in fact has 3 outcomes: to come up with an alumni system, network building and communications. The second outcome is to increase capacity for ESD implementation. As I said earlier in the first slide, teacher capacity is key in delivering ESD. And then of course, outcome 3 is increased capacity for monitoring and evaluation of goal 4, of which ESD falls under. So this is a 4-year project. And we have started in 2019 with 3 countries. And then in 2020, of course, in 2019, we had face-to-face meetings, and we were able to bring in 35 participants from the 3 countries. But of course, as we all experienced in 2020, we started our online course, which meant that, of course, we had more participants. We had more than 100. And now we are in our 3rd phase, where we also have more than 100 participants. And I think the challenge is how to make sure that the qualitative aspect, where you have face-to-face interaction, is also replicated. That's not going to be easy, but we try our best. And so that's our work on SST. And now, aside from this sustainability starts with teachers, we are also, of course, making sure that countries are working on policies, whole school approach, working with the youth and community development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, also for sticking to the time and for giving this impressive overview. Now I like to we jump from Harare to Santiago de Chile, to Cristian Bravo. He's a specialist in education for sustainable development and global citizen education at the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, and he will share the status quo of implementation in his region. So, Cristian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for this kind introduction. It is an honor for me joining you in this very interesting event and give you a brief look at ESD implementation in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm not going to share a presentation, I'm just going to talk, so I'm going to try to do it slowly. In any case you have any doubt, please just let me know at the end of my presentation. So just to start, our region, is very diverse, rich in ecosystems and natural resources, but at the same time is highly social and economically unequal. Additional Caribbean countries and cities are particularly vulnerable to hurricanes and tropical storms, making one of their greatest challenges today how to build more resilient communities and settlements to face these increasingly frequent events. Here in the region, since mid-20th century, more or less, progress was made to the treatment of the environment all across the region, affecting and mobilizing communities, civil society organizations, and environmental defenders to protect their territories. This created a really strong response movement through environmental and popular education, centered in empowering people to fight against climate injustice, nature degradation, and absolutely the fulfillment of human rights. Brazil, for example, was one of the greatest examples of this movement with Paulo Freire's critical approach to education, and also because they have an environmental education policy in place since the early 90s. So many countries had really diverse advances on this topic, but Brazil was one of the first, to start working in this from the environmental scope in education. Well, however, since ESD started its mainstreaming through the decade of ESD and the Global Action Program with the support of UNESCO, the Latin American and Caribbean countries started to enhance their commitments to environment protection through education, building upon this previous action, but also engage in different generation and teacher learning tradition to this purpose. Sadly, the holistic approach of ESD was kind of diminished, as facing inequalities meant a major shift in the way educational systems are structured and oriented today. And because Ministry of Environment here in the region were the main responsible for this agenda, having no reflection at all on the curricula, educational materials, and programs that were available for learners. Regardless of the situation, Ministry of Education in the region committed to advancing the achievement of the 4.7 goal in 2017 to the Buenos Aires Declaration on Education 2030. This can be a really supporting framework to start advancing this agenda within the region. By the end of the Global Action Program, like 2019, and the beginning of the implementation of ESD for 2030 framework and roadmap, 26 countries in the region were engaged on ESD. But as I said before, in really different stages, a few countries, for example, advances a lot on ESD policies and frameworks, such as Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Uruguay, Argentina, Guatemala, and Costa Rica. And they really try to engage this and link their efforts to their commitment under the Paris Agreements, the NDCs, mitigation and adaptation plans, and other environmental commitments. For other hand, other countries such as Cuba and Dominican Republic were really focused on strengthening teachers' training and developing educational materials, while in the rest of the Caribbean, Tibet, Training Vocational Educational and Training, is being oriented today to more greener jobs and occupation through curricular transformation and policy review. 2021 has been a key milestone for mainstreaming ESD in Latin America and the Caribbean. With the pandemic increasing social economic gaps all over the region and evident climate crisis effects on many countries, ESD has been identified as an effective means to social transformation and adaptation to climate-related challenges. So far, we have here in the region 5 countries work under national initiative on ESD with a seed fund provided by the Japanese Trust Fund. And those are Cuba, Costa Rica, Honduras, Haiti, and Peru. And we have these countries working under national strategies on ESD, building on previous efforts. That's one of the main focus we're trying to foster here in the countries, because many of them has advances in this environmental scope of education, but they haven't really integrated the other aspects, social, cultural, economical development and sustainability. So these 5 countries have been building upon that, to create their strategy. And so far, there's a lot of other countries that are interested in advancing this, but the pandemic has set a really challenge, to kind of integrate this responsibility and this commitment to countries. So far, as I said before, the main challenges for the countries to commit with the ESD for 2030 framework and roadmap has to do with resource mobilization, and current models for economic development that many countries still have here. But it seems to be changing, slowly, but in a really firm way, through the evident shift on production and consumption patterns that have been fostered, and kind of realized with youth advocacy and participation. So hopefully we think that in the upcoming years, many countries will be really interested in advancing this agenda, because it's a really great way, to kind of put under the same umbrella many of the challenges they currently have in the educational system. I think that's a kind of a broad overview of the regional state and ESD. So over to you, Hannah. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Cristian. Yeah, so for this very interesting insight, also how it has changed. So by different experience. So thank you very much. Now we jump to Paris, and I hand over to Jung Byun and to Bernard Combe. I think Bernard will start. Bernard he coordinates the implementation of UNESCO Education for Sustainable Development 2030 different priority areas, for example, accelerating local level actions and empowering and mobilizing youth. And one is currently Senior Project Officer in the section of Education for Sustainable Development. And you're focusing also on the preparing and launch of the new global framework on ESD, and also have been involved in organizing quite a lot of activities around this. So now you both will give us an overview over the status quo in Europe, and I hand over to Bernard. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. I will start by kind of a general regional overview, and then Juan will go into more kind of country level details. So the Europe region is a bit of a puzzle because there are many frameworks that fit the Europe region in terms of environmental issues and sustainability, let alone education for sustainable development or environmental education. One level is the EU, the European Commission. As some of you, those from the Europe region, have seen, they've launched a public, or they had a public consultation on coming up with a recommendation on education for sustainability for the EU member states to adopt and to basically integrate further environmental sustainability issue into educational programs throughout the region. Another player in the Europe region is the Council of Europe, which for those who are not familiar with the Europe region, that's where it starts getting a bit complicated, because the Council of Europe also has countries that are part of it that are not EU members. But for the Council of Europe, their vision for ESD and environmental education falls under an umbrella that they call global education, which also includes citizenship issues and a few other things. So they have a slightly, different view. And then there's also the UN Economic Commission for Europe, which has a steering committee and a strategy on ESD. And this strategy basically aligns itself on the UNESCO strategies. So that's kind of I would call it kind of the legal and policy framework for the region. In terms of civil society, there again, it's also quite an array from NGOs and other civil society organizations that are very focused on education and sustainability, to others who are focused on basically defending the planet, like WWF or Greenpeace, that are putting the kind of the human rights angle into this discussion. And then depending on countries, I'll take the example of my own country, France. Within even the ESD/environmental education civil society, there are different trends. Some still want to follow the line that was started on pure environmental education. Others want to open up to everything else. As you mentioned now, I coordinate the priority action area on youth. And as we know, youth has been out there on Fridays and other days to say, hey, what are you doing to address this issue of climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution? And governments haven't really been responding. These young people in many countries have taken their own government to court. And in the last few cases, court has sided with them and said, government, in whatever, 2 months, 3 months, give us a report of what you're going to do. This year is clearly building up. Young people were in Milan for the pre-COP last week or the week before, and they're clearly getting ready to make some noise for the Glasgow COP. Whether or not they'll be able to be there physically or not, these are also, this is a portion of society that we have to take into account within the discussion of civil society involvement, because there are more and more individuals who are getting involved in the discussions. And also in Europe, you mentioned I deal with local level. Many cities and municipalities have established their own ESD action plans to respond to this and to make things move. So now I'll pass on to Juan for if more focused on countries. Over to you.
Thanks, Bana, and thanks, Hannah. Just focusing and adding to what Bana mentioned, in the European region for this topic of country initiative on ESD for 2030, as my colleague Carolyn and Christian already mentioned, this is the flagship approach, implementation strategy of our new ESD for 2030 framework, whereby we invite countries to mobilize and organize multi-stakeholder processes building on their ongoing activities on ESD, bringing together different stakeholders, including, of course, the civil society members, to promote and create synergies around what is already going on around education for sustainable development. So in this regard, around the Europe region, there are many countries who are already working towards building their own country initiative. For example, Germany is already discussing these aspects. Sweden, Netherlands, Hungary, Cyprus, Switzerland, Latvia. There are many countries who are already engaged in the process of developing their own country initiative. In particular, for example, in the case of Sweden, they're putting it in connection with their ongoing mapping, nationwide mapping of ESD activities. Whereas in case of Netherlands and Cyprus, they're building it around their national ESD strategy building. So it connects very much with their ongoing already on-track processes around ESD, but having it in a much more focused way so that it connects with the global processes. So that is the overall status in Europe for the country initiative. And we hope that this interest around individual activities, as well as for the collective collaboration within and beyond countries continue in the next years, especially for those countries who are a little bit less interested in ESD. So we hope to see more of peer-to-peer collaboration in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. So I think there's already opening up some topics for debate later on, I think. But I'm very glad that we are also having the Arab area represented here, and I'd like to warmly welcome also Mr. Salim Shehadeh from UNESCO Beirut, and who will give us an overview of the status quo of the implementation in the Arabic region. So Salim, the floor is yours.
Greetings to everyone from Beirut office. And actually, the Arab region receives 2.1% of the global average annual precipitation and holds 1–2% of the annual renewable freshwater resources of the world. Yet it accounts for 10% of the world's land mass and is home to more than 5% of the world's total population. Actually, over the years, the Arab region has faced critical environment challenges, including water shortage, desertification, degradation of the coastal environment, air pollution, waste management, biodiversity loss, and emerging environmental threats such as climate change hazards. Actually, ESD initiatives in the other region, actually, the UNESCO office Beirut concentrated actually at the beginning for capacity building for youth. In 2017, we have organized the ESD leadership capacity building workshop for youth. And it was like from 17 Arab countries, we have 39 participants who at the end, they are, as you know, like youth are the change agents, they are ambassadors to advocate for ESD, and they move these experiences actually towards their countries, and they have established different activities since 2017 in regarding to boost ESD for education for sustainable development all the way through. One actually from Yemen, actually, he said that we have learned a lot from the training workshop, and all these things will allow us to be the ambassadors of ESD in our countries. Yemen is poor, conflict-ridden country. ESD could be a way to fit people out of poverty and war and achieve peace, prosperity, and equal distribution of resources. Moreover, recently we had a UNESCO online workshop, the training for the Arab youth. As I said, we concentrated on youth on ESD and green pivot. And this one actually we gathered youth from like about 60 youth from 18 Arab countries all the way through. And they have established their own actually projects at the end, and they took it back to their country to advocate for ESD in general. Now these are some pictures of them, of the youth working, and it was integrated actual approach for them, and it was like doing some games and different aspects to ESD for 2030, including educational field visits to work to experience nature. Moreover, in 2017, we did sustainability for youth, which we did that one in for school aged 9 to 12 students. We have about 25 youth activists together working 2-3 months to communicate these aspects for them. And as I said, we had 385 school students aged 19 to 12 from 9 public schools and 2 private schools from Lebanon. And they have concentrated on this training on recycling, upcycling, the concept of permaculture and urban farming, educational field visits also to experience nature. And these are the kids and working. Okay, recently we're having Trash Hack Eco, a classroom. This aims actually to reduce water in communities through upcycling and recycling of plastic waste and tries to solve the lack of learning facilities in rural villages. This is being conducted down in Egypt. And these some photos regarding that one. Actually, country initiatives, ESD for 2030, the vision of ESD country initiatives was widely discussed in our latest ESD Arab Regional Technical Meeting that was held in 9 June, where experts from UNESCO Beirut office, Ban Ki-moon, government officials from Lebanon, different Arab countries, Jordan, Oman, Syria, and representatives also from civil society organizations for this initiatives. Actually, I'll brief about some initiatives related to some Arab countries. Like Lebanon is currently drafting inclusive plans toward sustainable development in general and ESD in particular. Sustainable development concepts will be integrated into all courses and all classes to improve each student's interpersonal and skills. A systematic approach will be adopted in planning the curriculum. Also, higher education is taking place into that one, enhancing the implementation of ESD at the Faculty of Education for Lebanese University. Jordan initiatives on ESD are already started from 2015, focusing on ensuring its policy, environmental, and institutional frameworks are conducive to the commencement of the 2030 agenda. Robust implementation, building on the achievements and successful mechanisms. The Education for Sustainable Development Committee has been established actually from all related ministries, including the civil society organizations. Moreover, Oman has also started its pursuit for ESD by establishing a national working group to focus on the 5 priority action areas in alignment with the Oman Vision 2040, which aims at achieving quality education systems, computerizing schools, building educators' capacities, activating the rural youth, and building partnerships with local communities. Continuous analysis of the curriculum in order to integrate it into the education system. Syria Ministry of Education designed the curriculum on the 17th Sustainable Development Goals, designed vocational education curricula to include different branches such as agriculture, tourism, industry, and trade, and from the 4th to the 9th grades. A number of projects have been launched. The most important of are the Get Ready to Attend the School project, the composition of English curriculum for kindergarten, the necessary training manuals, the Corona pandemic response plan, as well as the continuation training courses on capacity building and self-qualification. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great insight also into different countries. And yeah, now when I was listening to all of you, I find it already really extremely interesting to see all the different aspects and that you have been highlighting in your report. That was really already very, very instructive. We now like to move on to first a little bit conversation among the 6 of us here on the panel, and then the Q&A session also to the participants, and also a little bit to encourage the participants. Yeah, we start now first here on the panel, and we like to explore 3 different areas. We like to see what are the next steps. We also like to hear about the main challenges, and also we like to hear about the role of the civil society organizations. But before before we get into this, I like to ask you maybe a rather personal question, because as you all know, the UN has defined education and the SDGs not only from ensuring access to education, but access to quality education for all. So which is a quality shift, and reflects definitely also a lot of learning, I assume. And now I would be curious, first of all, to hear from you from the different areas, definitely also probably in the specific context of your areas. What does quality education mean for you in this context? And I see who likes to speak up first, and then I make sure that we've heard every region.
So maybe I could give it a first go. It's a big question to respond, but I guess many of us here would agree that quality means also relevance. Relevance to the local context, relevance to the developments around the world, relevance to our questions of our lives at the moment. And of course, climate change and these environmental issues are one of the biggest threats to our survival in this world. So for us, that is one of the key reasons why we are putting education for sustainable development as one of the key components of quality education, and of also the relevance to all 17 SDGs. Yeah, that's my first go.
Which is very hard to to comment on, I guess, but maybe there are also some aspects. Yeah, Salim.
Yeah, I'm gonna say like the quality for related to technical and vocational education, that one is, and as one mentioned, the quality of education for technical and vocational education, it means relevant to labor market needs and demands. And now we have a lot of things going in addition to the environment, climate change, all of that one, such recycling, greening, green pivot, all of these aspects show. So the technical and vocational education should be a quality, including all these aspects to be able to respond to the labor market needs and demands. Thank you.
I think that's very interesting. Yeah, Bernard.
Yes, to build on what my two colleagues have said, yeah, quality, but also has to be lifelong. Education is not just defined by some decree that says from this age to that age you have compulsory education. Education is lifelong, and education is not only in formal settings. Education is in all kinds of settings, and that clearly is where civil society has a clear role to play in the non-formal, informal elements of that education / learning, because some people tend to, when they hear the word education, think grades and, you know, following something. Whereas I would say for me, in terms of environment, education for sustainable development, it has to be hands-on. It has to be, the relevance is not only the relevance to the issues that we're facing, but it's the relevance of how can you, in a world that's constantly changing, you know, how can you adapt? What skills can you have? So this hands-on aspect, whether it's hands-on in terms of, you know, like touching things or otherwise, is very important.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, Carolyn, and then Cristian.
Okay, I think aside from relevance and lifelong, quality education depends on the modality of delivery. And that's why for us in this office, our priorities are teachers. No, because as Frey, the colleague from the Latin American region has explained, no, I don't believe banking education. We just say, okay, we teach the facts and everything is delivering quality education. That's why I think now with our region, we're saying it needs to be transformative, because otherwise it's just a transmission of data, of facts. And to my mind, this does not constitute quality education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yeah, Cristian.
Many thanks. Well, building upon everything that was already been said, here in Latin America, we are trying to work around the 3 dimensions of education, you know, of learning and teaching processes. We are focusing on the cognitive learning, the social-emotional learning, and the behavioral learning. We think that is really something really important to take in consideration here in the region. Actually, the quality topics is really is a really hot topic here in the region. You know, many countries are constantly questioning what is quality, you know, in education. And what we're trying to do here in the region is we already have, for example, here in UNESCO and Latin America, a laboratory on quality of education, which is constantly doing studies, you know, to see how different countries are advancing, you know, in quality terms regarding each of these three dimensions and providing support to this country. So from my point of view, I think that quality education has to do with relevant life learning and absolutely education from all these three dimensions to be approached. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing this. I think it was very, very rich aspects that have been raised here with respect to quality and also to relevance. Yeah, now I like to move on and to our, well, three main questions, which first of all is in your respective region. So what are the next steps UNESCO is going to undertake to implement ESD 2030?
The next steps we're taking here in the region, you know, has to do with collecting evidence, relevant evidence, because as I said before, here in the region, many countries have been working on this from the environmental point of view, but has been letting aside, you know, the social, economical, and cultural points, topics related to sustainable development. So I think that collecting evidence is one of the main next steps we are working here right now. And also, we are trying to identify good practices and experiences carried out in the region, aiming to create opportunities to exchange and cooperation among countries. And building on that, you know, trying to find resource and mobilization of resources for accelerating action. And that's all. Many thanks.
I should have mentioned, just like all the regions, Africa is very diverse and very uneven vis-a-vis their understanding of ESD. Now we have countries, that's my first slide, which have no idea at all of what ESD and everything, but countries, I think, Southern Africa, we have been very privileged that we really have a rich and advanced ESD. And I think depending on the state of the countries, one would need to adjust because, of course, on one hand, we need advocacy for countries to make sure that ESD is a key area. But then on the other hand, how do we enlarge participation of the stakeholders? We've seen very much in Europe and sometimes in Asia, the large mobilization of youth. Now we've seen just before the elections in Germany, how 300,000 young people were mobilized. But I'm not sure we have seen that in terms of numbers of participation in Africa. So I think how do we engage the diverse stakeholders, government, civil society, business, private, everything is a key area of work. But I think I would like to end by saying that in our work now in Southern Africa, what I realize is that even in our advanced work in ESD in the region, it is very separate and how should we say, divided from the main environmental COP26, okay? So all the presidents here are going to COP26 and everything, but they're not talking about education and training. No, it's about mitigation, adaptation. And so now in our region, what we're trying to do, because the president of Malawi, for example, announced, Malawi is the chair of the SADC Secretariat, that he will bring, they're organizing a green conference tomorrow in the SADC region, but I looked at the agenda, nothing on education and training. So I think the challenge, I mean, given the diversity and the unevenness of the work that has to be done, a key area of work for UNESCO and for the regions is how to engage with the COP discussions. No, because otherwise we are in our little corner on education for sustainable development, while the mainstream work, where all the money, all the discussion is on the COP discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Salim, do you also like, okay, what are the next steps in your area?
Actually building on the country initiatives that we have started in June 9th. So we following up with that one with the country initiatives for the Arab region. As my colleagues mentioned, like it's diverse between different countries. The countries are like much advanced in the implementation of the ESD for 2030. Other countries are really very poor, which is not taking the part as they're supposed to because of financial aspects and different other challenges with that one in. But like with collecting like good practices, exchanging good practices with other countries to improve that one in. And also we should be linking SDG 4 activities, SDG 4 monitoring, SDG 4 with the ESD for 2030, because all of you know 4.7 included in the SDG 4 for that one, and countries are providing with the country initiatives and country reports regarding monitoring SDG 4. So all of these one actually, and we are also having all the stakeholders, like doing committees, including all the stakeholders together, and including the civil societies and all the ministries related to technical and vocational education, and also ministries of education, higher education, all environmental, Ministry of Environment, and all together in a committee to work on ESD for 2030. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's also quite interesting. And Bernard and Mon, with respect to Europe, what are the next steps UNESCO is taking to implement?
So between Bernard and I, we divided our roles. So for this one, I'm on it. So following the UNESCO World Conference that took place May last year, hosted also by the government of Germany, where more than 70 ministers of education spoke in support of this country initiative for 2030. We will, of course, follow up with countries in Europe as well as across the world to make sure that this expansion and of coverage of ESD is fulfilled within the time frame that we've committed. And in particular, this follows and builds on the EU call for action that was pledged by 18 countries around the Berlin conference from 18 European countries. So I think in the region, there's a lot of momentum to pick up on. And secondly, I think it's important for us to recognize the need for developing and furthering the quality of ESD that is going on. For example, recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was the pre-COP event in Milan among young people. And one of the questions that shocked me there was that one young person raised his hand and asked, how come there's no country in the world that has proper climate change education? I know that many of you would say, okay, there are many countries that do climate education, but in fact that dawned on me that perhaps this concept of climate education, the quality and the level that young person was referring to is different from what usually education policymakers are referring. So we need to really try our best to keep up with this ever-growing request and demand from young people on the quality of education and ESD, as well as climate education, to respond to the challenges of today. So I think while we are trying to improve the overall coverage of number of countries that are working on ESD, we have to also work towards deepening the quality of ESD that we promote. So two aspects to consider in the region.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, very interesting. Again, the use is putting pressure also on the whole. It yeah, makes it more dynamic. Yeah. Now I like to ask, with respect to the role of civil society organizations. As you're aware, this is an initiative also from RENU, the umbrella organization of the civil society organizations. And now we like to learn from you, to hear, is there anything planned or what is planned to involve civil society organizations, or what, from your perspective, is the role of civil society organizations in your region? Bernard has already mentioned, so it's not only the organizations, we also have to think of non-organized civil society actors like youth, for example, so that has been already mentioned, and I've taken up this very well. I see who likes to raise, Carolyn. Carolyn, yes.
I think, as I said, we did not see as much mobilization of young people in Africa. And I think I should say that, of course, it's also dependent on the political context. And not all governments would like to be examined when they have all these mines and all these excavations and all this pollution. We have electricity cuts here. So it's not easy to raise all these issues. And that's where civil, and in some countries here, there are no rights to express oneself. Once you raise opposition, you can easily be jailed, no? And so I think that's a very important area of work in some countries here in Africa, as I think, as well as in Latin America or in maybe the Arab region. But I think it's a very important area of work, because we know that, as you can see, how Greta Thunberg is talking about how governments are not doing anything at all. So if the young people, if civil society is having that tone in some countries here, I'm not sure how they will be received. So I think the involvement of civil society in very key areas, politically and economic, because we know climate change, climate crisis is affecting such areas. I think that's the challenge. And I think I was thinking of how do we really support civil society so that they're able to raise these issues in countries where it's not difficult to raise. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yeah. Who likes to, yeah, Bernard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to build on what Carolyn was saying, yes, civil society, I think the big challenge for civil society is that civil society organizations have to learn to kind of come together and federate, to become more complementary, so that their impact on governmental decision, for example, or mobilizing young people are more effective. Long time ago, I studied and researched networks of civil society organization, and clearly the ones that had a mix and were complementary were more effective, they had more visibility, and they could make more changes in society. I think that's one element to look at, to take into account. The other thing to take into account is, because of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, there's been quite a growth of civil society groups. I won't call them organizations, because people realize we need to, in particular, for example, here in France, organizations are providing free food. I've seen a big increase in the number of students coming, university students coming to be part of those, both to help out, but also to get free food. We've seen that in many other types of exchange things. There's been, at least in Europe, there's this growth of like repair cafes and like sharing vegetable gardens within urban areas, that you create these movements to do things. From the outside, it doesn't look like education, but actually it's about learning. It's about sharing the things you know with someone else. I can't repair my toaster, but this person knows how to do it. I can see how the person does it. Then maybe the next time I'll be able to do it myself. It's also this, I think the COVID has also shown us that one of the key elements for civil society is this element of connection. We need to connect with other people. And during lockdown, there's been, all these research studies have shown that the stress on mental health has skyrocketed because people were not able to connect. Of course, we can connect through a screen, but it's not the same as sitting in the same room and, you know, talking for hours and hours. I mean, I'll say that's my French side that comes out. You know, we go to a cafe and then we, as we say in French, on refait le monde. We just discuss everything and we rebuild the world. So I think a key element for civil society is this connection, and the connection between civil society organization between countries. Because sometimes it's like, oh, well, they're doing it differently, but actually they might be doing it the same way. That's one thing. And then the other part of it is clearly civil society has shown it has a role at the political table, at the discussion level, at the political level. It depends on region, but in Europe, civil society has clearly shown that. And it has been been quite acknowledged. And one last comment about civil society, particularly for the Europe region, civil society organizations that are working in adult education have been very key to say, hey, look, it's not because someone is over 45, over 50 that they cannot learn and they cannot contribute to others' learning. And that's something that has often been forgotten actually by the EU and some of our own European governments. So that's another thing to throw in.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I saw also, Carolyn, when listening to you, I think it becomes clear it's quite a different reality. Yeah? Carolyn was saying it's a challenge for civil society organizations to raise their voice, and then now you're encouraging them to federate and to become even stronger. So probably that's quite different realities here.
Yeah, many thanks. I would like to add what Bernard was saying, that here in Latin America, civil society organizations have a really bigger role, you know, because as Carolyn was saying, here we have many risks, you know, to kind of raise our voices from the civil society organizations and kind of impact in the governments. You know, actually we have in place the Escazú Treaty that kind of built on that, you know, and try to fix that gap on having information, you know, on environmental issues and protection for environmental defenders, you know, all that kind of framework that allows people, you know, to participate and engage in these processes. Here in the region, we see that organizations have a really important role in local level action, the political incidents, and in technical research, and a lot in non-formal education opportunities, you know, for communities, for example, specific workers, you know, in areas that are really important, you know, to advance the agenda and start talking about these issues. And for example, because of the great effort that countries have to do, you know, to recover for the COVID pandemic, the latest ECLAC report, for example, established that 45 million of people will live under poverty here in the region in the next year. You know, that's a lot of people. That's a great challenge for countries to know how to support this process, how to build opportunities for all, and how to make education a key tool, you know, to habilitate people to kind of engage and participate and transforms their lives. Here in the region also, we carried out a study on the contributions civil society organizations are currently doing to achieve the 4.7 goal for the SDG agenda. So that's a publication I'm going to share here in the chat. It's really interesting, you know, because besides all the topics that organizations are currently working, establish as well the different levels of incidents these organizations are having in the governments and how they can contribute to enhance the efforts to achieve the SDG 2030 agenda, specifically through education. I think that that's one of the main things we see here in the region, that civil society organizations are filling the gap, providing up-to-date methodologies, innovative approaches to teaching and learning processes, or maybe disruptive models to transform educational environments in place where learners are able to learn what they live and live what they learn, which is key to dismantle all this socio-cultural reproduction of unsustainable consumption and production patterns. Many thanks. Up to you.
Actually, without the engagement of civil society in effective development cooperation, it will be like very difficult to achieve inclusive sustainable development and ensure that no one is left behind. Actually, in the Arab region, and recently, actually, because of COVID pandemic, like a lot of social, civil society organizations have raised up their activities inside, and particularly in the non-formal education and non-formal section, and educating, like learning, providing learning to youth in general in regarding to climate change, in regarding to different learning activities with that one in. But the problem, most of the times they are working like in isolation, alone by themselves. So we have, because they know their own community and they know they have their own network. So they do provide support by themselves, and they are not connected. They work in ad hoc places. They are not connected with the governments and the education systems back there with it too. So we should bring them up together in like a, how can I say, in like maybe a larger platform that includes all the ministries and all the social society organization with them too. Like for the Arab region, within the Arab region, the society, the civil society reflects the intertwining of the civil society organization sector and societal, relationship, which are dominated by tribal, clan, family, and religious ties. In several Arab countries, societal relations are more important than citizenship state relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salim.
Hi, I'm Pratana Dimal from Sri Lanka. I'm working with World University Friends. So I have 3 questions. I think Carolyn is still here with us. I have a question for her.
I'm still here.
Yeah. My question is, what is the nature of implementing ICT education in South Africa?
I mean, ICT?
ICT education, yes. ICT education for young youth.
I think that's a very important issue. And of course, like all the other countries, it's very uneven when you talk about ICT and education within the country and across the region. And
across the region, what kind of orientation they have in government level or in civil organizations? Do they have any special interest, or they are doing special programs to enhance this ICT education among young children?
I think as we all know now, with the COVID pandemic, the world was caught unaware, and I think Europe was also having that experience, North America, and you can just imagine what is the impact on Africa. Even if that many of the countries had ICT policies, the reality is teachers are not trained to do remote training, even the use of ICT as a pedagogical tool, not just using email. But for example, yes, last week there was the minister here in Zimbabwe said that really the government should take seriously ICT in education. But I think everybody in the region is now saying ICT is important. But the problem is we know that ICT related to connectivity, to electricity, to expensive data bundles, no? And we know that one of those who really have become rich through this COVID pandemic, aside from the pharmaceutical industry, is of course all this ICT and all these platforms, no? And I think the challenge is really how it can really be used to foster equity, because of course it's just exacerbating within the country, rural-urban divide, private-public, so it's a big issue, no? And of course we need to ask ourselves whether this ICT is sustainable, no? Because we know, for example, new app versions of Apple are actually destroying our environment. So how are we balancing all this advanced technology with all these sustainability concerns? Over.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carolyn. And Christiana, I want to know, I wonder whether in your region there are any free education system, or if there are, what are the future orientations in free education in your region?
In Sri Lanka, we have education policies. We don't charge from the students. We provide free of charge. She is asking whether in your region, whether there are free education systems or policies in any of the countries.
Mm-hmm. All right. And maybe can you also explain why this is of interest in this context of sustainable education and sustainable development? Maybe if you can help us to make the link, what is the interest behind this question?
Because there are a lot of poor people in some regions. They don't have financial resources to afford their education. You see, in Europe, in America, perhaps they have enough resources, but in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, we don't have enough resources to afford educations. That's
right.
Why she's asking, perhaps.
All right. Okay, now I get it. Yeah. So is there anything like this, Cristian, in your area?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm typing the questions to him anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So my last question is for Salim. Are there any countries still not paying much more interest in ESD? For Salim.
Okay.
Yes, actually, as I mentioned, there is a lot of challenges in some countries.
And why?
In the Arab region, because of financial issues, human resources actually is not back there, and also the paying attention much lately into the health sector comparing with the education sector. This is why all the funding, all the money goes to the health rather than going to the education system to enhance the quality and enhance the relevance, and including ESD on that one end. But some other rich countries, they're having the financial, so they are way ahead with the ESD, integrated ESD education in all grades. So it's a big differences between different countries because of these challenges.
Thank you so much, Salim, and thank you all.
What I wasn't getting in the question is that here in Latin America, we have I would say kind of a strong public education system, that has a lot of issues regarding quality, for example, of accessibility to people, but the systems are in place, and one of the main challenges for the region was that here in the region, in-person education, for one sense, is more easy, to have people going to school, and ensuring they have the K-12 formation, but in the case of the virtual education, it's been a big issue here in the region. For example, one of the latest reports we have carried out here with the support of the ECLAC here in Latin America has to do with 16 million of children and teenagers out of the system completely, in risk of dropping out because they have no connection at all to internet and couldn't follow up the current programs, to contextualize the curricula for this emergency. So maybe that's a really great challenge, for the years to come. But I would say that Latin America has these opportunities. There's a lot of gap, of course, regarding rurality, indigenous peoples, and of course, other vulnerable groups. But there are options, Only quality is always the main gap, you have in this public institution that provide education for free for people. Many thanks.
And thank you, Cristian. Thank you.
I like to also ask one question to Carolyn before she has to leave. And I know this question has been asked to one before. It is like, if you think of the year 2030, which is the time horizon of all these activities. So looking back, and things went well with respect to education for sustainable development in your region. What went well? How is the scenario then in 2030 if things went well? What would be the situation or the moment or the example where this has gone a good way?
Thank you, Hannah. I think one important, driver here in South Africa is the holding of the World Conference on Environment in Joburg. Mm-hmm. As you know, one of the World Conferences on Environment, Sustainable Development was held in Joburg. And I think because it was in South Africa, that's why South Africa, to my mind, is one of the most advanced countries here in the region. And that's why we have all these civil society, not only academic institutions, because by holding the meeting, the World Conference in an African country, you're able to really say, okay, education, sustainable development is not only a problem of Greta Thunberg, it's also a problem of Pumzila or another Zulu young child. But by bringing it close to home, I think there has been a lot of interest that has been generated. That's why when I said, for example, in 2015, when in Rwanda, the ministers of Africa came together, a key area of work is how to advocate for ESD. Now, because it's a new term, and now, of course, even if it's a new term, in fact, it's evolving. It's evolving in the sense, one, for example, in the sense that we are having, we have seen that before it was called environmental education, and now we call it education for sustainable development, and now we are calling it climate. There's a climate action or climate education. So even just to clarify these terms is also meaning to educate people. And so imagine what does that mean if in each of the country you have to do that, because like even if we look at how ESD is being done in countries in their curriculum, you would say, wow, it's not called ESD. It's not called environmental education. It might be called science. It might be called history, but they are mentioning it. So I think our challenge is how to interpret. And one of a very good Portuguese thinker, Boaventura dos Santos, talks about cultural translation. So I think we have a lot of cultural translation too, because like here in Africa, it's not as if the Africans had not heard of preserving environment and everything. It's very much indigenous. So we just need to make the connections. And I think, as Bernard was saying, making connections of NGOs and civil society, we need to make the connections that in the past, the ancestors here in Africa were very much in protecting their environment, were very much at one with their animals. But through all these ravages of colonialism and everything, so there's this big divide, no? In the sea, oops, the Africans did not care about environment. So I just want to end by saying that the challenge is to really make the connection from the past, the present, and the future. But making these connections entails really translating concepts, and the translation is literal as well as figurative. We are dealing here in English, but in all the African countries, they have several languages. And how it translates, and I think that's a big job that UNESCO has to do, to my mind, how to translate these concepts, this big notion, so that in fact, when the president, for example, the president of Zimbabwe is going to COP and he's making now all these announcements that yes, they're for environment, all this, but in fact, what does this mean for the ordinary Zimbabwean or the ordinary Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for this, very beautiful thoughts, and I think when I look into the faces, it seems to be inspiring. So Carolyn, thank you very much for having been with us. I know you're now in a different, in a second also obligation. So thank you for having been here with us, and maybe you're a little bit listening as far as possible. I see now in the chat there are no more questions at the moment, which gives me the opportunity to ask this question, which I've just asked Carolyn, also to share it with you, because I'm really curious also to hear from you from these different perspectives. So when you travel to 2030 and look back, and the decade has been successful. So what were the enabling factors on the one hand, and I think some enabling factors have already been mentioned, and also what is the result, how you realize this result has been achieved. I know it's a hard question, but I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are on this, and who likes to step in.
Basically, you want us to be optimistic. Positive.
I mean, I want to ask also the enabling factors. So it's not just dreaming, but also to ask what are the enabling factors. And
One kind of alluded to it that when we had in May, when we had our World Conference online from Berlin, what came out of this conference is the Berlin Declaration, and one element, probably the major commitment of that declaration, is a call to ensure that environmental and climate action is integrated into all education in all countries. Our Director General very quickly said, well, by 2025, it needs to be in most countries, and by 2030, clearly every country. So if we want to be on the optimistic side, 2030, we'll have that element in every single education system. I would say the challenge is that, I think Carolyn mentioned it for something else. We could have it, every minister signing it, passing a decree that says, no, from now on, no. But you still need to train the teachers to be able to deal with, is it just for the science teacher, or is it for any teacher to introduce those issues into what they're teaching? Because, you can teach about climate in your math class. If you're an art teacher, you can also teach about climate in your art class. In sports, you can have things that are related to issues of pollution or climate. So getting it to the teachers is going to take a little bit of time. It's just a numbers things, How many, I don't even know how many teachers are in France, but let's imagine we have to already retrain or provide in-service training for those who are already teaching. At the same time, we also have to train the new ones. And it can't just be, okay, let's just add one more module. You'll study climate for 3 months and then you'll be ready. So there's that. Then you also need to ensure that your school director is in tune with this new thing. Because the teachers, you can have some very dynamic teachers who want to do it, but the school director might say, oh, yes, but remember, you're teaching the last grade of high school, and we have to make sure our students, get the highest grades and the best notes when they finish high school. So there are these many challenges. That's one element. The other element, in particular for the Europe region, is that a lot of people forget there are a lot of schools that are run by the Ministry of Agriculture, and they are often treated as third category because they're not under the Ministry of Education. We have this vision that the Ministry of Education is the all-powerful, knows everything, which we've seen is not there. And then you have some countries where there are some schools, like some TVET-related schools, that are not fully linked to education. They are linked to the Ministry of Education, but also to private sector, to Ministry of Economy. So we need to broaden our vision. But in some ways, at least on paper, we could say by 2030, it will be there on paper. It might not be there in the classroom, because that will take a bit of time. But let's be positive about it.
Having it on paper at least would be an achievement. Yeah, who likes to follow up? So it's both. Let's be optimistic, but also address the main challenges. So it should not be put under the carpet. Yeah. Who likes to? Yeah, one. Mm-hmm.
Yes, just following up on Bernard's optimism, I'll continue to be optimistic and say, ideally, of course, in the next 10 years, if we do our jobs properly, then hopefully not only would we have this on paper in all countries across the world, in all schools across the world, they would teach and they would learn about education for sustainable development. But also we would somehow be able to mobilize not only the heads, but also the hearts and hands of people. So really making sure that our teachers embrace this urgency, embrace the necessity for acting on these topics into their hearts, for our learners to have that in their hearts, for policymakers to have that in their hearts, and also the decision makers and all the citizens as lifelong learners in different communities to have this in their hearts. And somehow, to a certain extent, I'm not asking for everybody to take into their hands, but to a certain extent, if we can at least reach by 2030 some of these people to take this onto their hands and take action on it, then we would be, I think, very, very successful. I think we would be happy and be able to congratulate ourselves on our success. So possibly, definitely to heads by putting into paper, but also to hearts if possible, and then to hands. I'm being very optimistic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juan. Salim, then Cristian. Yeah, Salim.
Actually, for the integration of ESD into all education, all from kindergarten all the way up to higher education should be coming through, because as my colleagues mentioned, there is teaching science, they're teaching history, different subjects, and it's already part of the ESD. It's on it, but like the teachers, they don't know it's like ESD, and they teach it like different subjects with that one in. So mainly we need to rehabilitate or have capacity building, continuous capacity building for the teachers to be able to integrate it. And also the books and text needs to be developed more to integrate the ESD aspects in all subjects, as not by subject by its own, but will be integrated into the subject as a whole. And we're having more like hands-on related to ESD, because students learn more once they do hands-on education on ESD for 2030. Moreover, the countries, they have their own plans, country plans for 2025, 2030, 2040, but it's not really aligned with the UNESCO ESD for 2030. So we should give the ownership for the countries to be able to integrate ESD 2030 in their own plans, to have it merged into their own plans, to be country initiative, and to be like it's their ownership for that one in. So this is mainly, and thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Cristian, and then I also realized someone has raised, Gavani has raised his hand, so I realized it. Yeah, but for Cristian.
Many thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I was thinking that the ESD for 2020 roadmap actually provides a pretty clear path, for what we expected to get the countries to engage with. We think that maybe in the policy level we will have many countries engaging, in the transformation of their educational system, adapting the educational programs and curricula. We are expecting, to many schools to engage in transforming their environments to provide more hands-on learning, regarding ESD related topics and climate change related topics as well, and from that, maybe that's the main challenge, because, for example, one of the experiences I was here to let you know about is one that we are trying to support in Ecuador, that is currently working in a contextualized curricula for Galapagos Island, working on the ESD principles, trying to provide a more sustainable educational framework, for people living in the islands to really secure their livelihoods, and provide a more sustainable future for them. So in that regard, the advances the first stage, they establish all the policies, they have all the educational curriculum to work around this. They then prepare 14 specific programs to approach every specific topic, and then when it was the implementation time, teacher has no training at all to implement this, So then is when the link is broken. We need to include teachers in this process. We need to change not only the in-service training, but also the pre-service training. This is not just a topic that you can learn, as Bernard said, in 3 months, and that's all. You need to change the way your mind is set to provide more sustainable approaches to education that includes not only environmental, but also all the other elements of the sustainable development. So I would say that luckily, I would like to expect that here in the region, we have very trained teachers, that are really knowledgeable around these issues. And that critical mass of teachers trained will get to engage youth, to take action and accelerate local level action. So being really optimistic, I would focus, in having all teachers aboard, working around this, getting to promote all these issues all over the country and the region. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Yeah, so it's getting more and more ambitious. If now the specific persons are coming into play. So now I like to invite Dr. Gawami, that's what I see at least here, where has raised his or her hand.
To the issue of including the SDGs in the school curriculums and all subjects. Maybe you know that in Germany, we have such a kind of an orientation framework for all the schools, all the 16 German education ministries. And this was adopted last time in 2015. And just at this moment, there is a review of this orientation framework. So if you want to see what is included and how we have been achieving to include the SDGs, but also beforehand the MDGs into the subjects, then you can have a look in the chat. I have mentioned this, and also because the website mainly is in German, there is a chance with this free translation tool of DeepL that you can get an inside view how this is done in Germany. And as you know, in Germany, we have 16 different states. It's a federal republic, as you know, and therefore it was not very easy to bring all these 16 ministries in one such orientation framework. And this has been supported by the Ministry of Development Cooperation. And this is the linkage that we are trying to bring forward, that development education is not only supporting projects outside Germany, outside Europe, but has the main task to transfer the whole system inside Germany as a main priority. If we are discussing transferring the SDGs and include this to the society, we have to start at the schools. And therefore, this is a unique project that the Ministry of Development Cooperation has financed this task for many, many years now. And therefore, if you have a chance, if you are interested to look it inside, and if you have further questions, don't hesitate to contact me, because I have the privilege with my colleagues from FENRO as well to sitting on this advisory board for the revision of this textbook. So if you have any questions, please let me know. You're more than welcome.
Thank you very much for this contribution. So this is also what this forum is for, learning from each other, getting to know what our resources are there. And yeah, so thank you very much. I have one question in the chat. Malati, do you like to ask it yourself? Yeah, so then I like to invite you to ask your question.
Thank you so much, moderator and the speakers. It was really a sustainable education for me in specific, and I enjoyed it. My one question is, when we talk about education, we focus more on the educational institution or the CSOs or the power centers. But at present, the business houses are the huge responsible person who hires the people and who are responsible for most of the things. Where are they in this picture? What are we to do with them? How are we doing with them other than tapping their resources? Are there any models from other countries? Because I feel in most of the places, that is the biggest area which we have to do it. And we push the CSOs to take the major responsibility. But the powerful persons like corporate houses, what are they? Where are they? What are we to do? How to make a difference through them? That's my question from the work. Any place, please.
Thank you very much, Malati. This is a heavy one for the last question that we are digesting here on the panel, but thank you very much. I think it's a very valid one, and I'm also curious on what our panelists like to share on this question and who likes to start. So we are all invited. Yeah, Bernard. Courageous.
Courageous. Well, there has been some discussions with private sector and these big companies because a lot of them say, you know, we want to be socially responsible, and so they from time to time they approach UNESCO to say, yes, well, you know, could you come and give a presentation and talk to our staff? Now that's an easy thing to do. The challenge is for those companies to actually do in-house training of their own staff on basically what does corporate social responsibility mean? What does it mean to use these, because all these big companies always throw at you these ISO standards, you know, we are blah, 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 ISO so-and-so compliant. But what does it actually mean? That's the one thing. The challenge with the private sector is that many of these big companies have foundations, which are how they do basically charity, how they deal with education and those kind of things. But the problem we've seen is sometimes the dialogue between the corporate entity and its foundation is not always there, because it doesn't always align what they are doing. There have been some examples here and there of companies who have really understood that, well, if they're going to train their workers and their staff to be more, let's say, green and eco-responsible, they need to do more than just do, you know, staff training every so-and-so. They need to go beyond that. Some have gone beyond to basically provide materials for schools to deal with those issues, but it's still very much one-off, you know, one or two. And then in some cases, it depends on kind of who's in charge of that program. For many years, UNESCO, with one particular private sector, multinational based in France, for like nearly 5 years, we did environmental awareness campaigns every year throughout the world with schools all over the world. But then when the person who was in charge moved to somewhere else, the new person was, well, no, I can't do what my predecessor did, so I'll do something else. And well, education awareness is not really my thing. I want to do something else. So it's really, I mean, it's very case by case. The other problem with private sector is that it depends on how they're perceived in countries. For example, I will take an example. We used to have a UNESCO office in Moscow, and there was a lot of material developed for water education, and it was sponsored by Coca-Cola Russia. In Russia, it was posed no problem at all. If we were to do it here in France, as soon as somebody would hear that this was sponsored by Coca-Cola, you would be thrown out, and people would like be, you know, total riot. How dare you do that? And it's really the question of how these corporates are perceived. In some cases, you know, they're part of the picture, you do things with them, no big deal. But in most instances, they're kind of, you know, they sit over there, we sit over here, we don't understand what they do. If we can grab money from them to do something, we'll do it. But I think there's definitely a need for a better dialogue. There are some groups, I mean, there's the World Business Council for Sustainable Development that tries to do that. There's the UN Global Compact that has this list of principles, but it's really still kind of an unexplored area.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's for the question, which also has shown another challenge that needs to be addressed, or another area also when it comes to involving stakeholders that has been mentioned many times by all of you. And before I start the closing, I just have a look if there are any more comments now from our panelists that you like to share before I close and come to the brief summary. Yeah, Salim.
Hi, regarding to the private sector, that's the question actually. What we are doing, we are trying, I'm talking about from the technical and vocational education point of view. So we said the quality is related to relevance. So the relevant, it's where we graduate our students. So it's the transition of the world of work. So at the end, they will be going to be engaged in the private sector. So we are working on enhancing public-private partnerships in between both. a lot of education systems and related technical and vocational education. They have established like program advisory committees involving the private sector in from the beginning, actually from the development of curricula all the way up to the graduation with that one in. But and also they have sectorial councils and different subjects like food, agriculture, like electrical engineering, whatsoever. It's connected with these sector councils that will provide advice for the technical and vocational education in order to enhance their technical and vocational education curricula to be able to meet the labor market needs and demands. And we tell them it's mutual benefits. It's a benefit for the graduates, it's a benefit for the private sector, because at the end, the students will be engaged with the private sector. So from the beginning, if it will give them the relevance with that one, it will be easier and much appreciated for the companies itself. On the other hand, the private sector, they will ask for some kind of benefits like levy taxes from the government itself. So it's a lot of problems in between both, but like it's enhancing public-private partnership should be.
Okay. Thank you very much, Salim.
Thank you.
I just got one hand raised in the chat. Dr. Gwame, if it's very short, because now we are actually coming to an end. So
it's very short. It's
good.
Only about the private sector.
Yeah.
And we should advocate that education as a human right must be free in all its stages, and that this must be one of the 4 basic responsibilities of all governments worldwide, along with health, infrastructure, and security. We have to lobby that education is by no means a business. This must be very clear, and we have not to compromise, even if I know that the situations in some parts of the world are very difficult, but education is a basic human right, and that's all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I see quite a lot of nodding here on the panel and also in the audience. So thank you very much for making this clear in case, it wasn't clear so far. Yeah, from my side now, I can, I like to thank you very much for the panelists for being with us. Thank you very much for all your insights and also for participants for your questions. I found it an extremely interesting exchange and conversation, hearing from these different areas. What are your different challenges? How you define what is quality of education, and what are the next steps? So there's a big variety as far as I mean, which is not very much surprising, but really having a look, what are the differences and the realities in these different regions, I find extremely interesting. And I hope you've also learned as much as I did and found it inspiring. So thank you very, very much. And I think this is a type of conversation dialogue that needs to repeat it and go on. And because it's like when you contrast things, yeah, I mean, it's maybe not just compare, it's not about comparing, but it's about a contrast. And sometimes you learn, so what's the situation you are actually on. And in this respect, I found this extremely fruitful. Thank you very, very much.